Every time I feel the walls closing, you cover me and breathe life in me again.
One thing I want to draw your attention to before we get rolling on Ruth chapter 4 is what's up on the screen. That is my really horrible, poor attempt at graphic design. Thankfully, I do have a friend who is actually good at that sort of thing, and they're making one that's a little more, nice and professional looking. But it wasn't ready in time. Next week, Advent starts. Right, next week, we are into the Advent season, and there are 4 Sundays in Advent. And so this year, rather than the normal track of things that get talked about in Advent, I want to focus in on Christ, on who he was, specifically 4 roles that he fulfills, and what that means about him and what that means for us. So he was a carpenter. What does that mean? And not just that he made stuff, there's some other implications there. He was a healer, right? Not just a doctor, but he performed miracles. Our Savior, and he is the King. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to take a look at each one of those 4. And hopefully I'll have a better looking picture for you next time, but I had this, so I thought I'd throw it up there. But today, we are in the book of Ruth. Ruth chapter 4. We're going to draw to a close our study of Ruth. And it's been an interesting journey so far. Yeah? This has been kind of a odd courtship, right? As us looking in on what's going on, it'd make a really good movie. Have they made a movie about Ruth? It have to be the right people to make it, because we already said if Hollywood got their hands on it, it'd be R-rated. And it's not an R-rated story. It's actually a good, uplifting, inspirational story. And so we had Naomi and Ruth coming back from Moab. Remember Naomi and her husband Elimelech? There was a famine, so they moved to Moab, where there was food, so they could care for their family. Whenever I was young, my dad works construction, right? You go where the work is. Or when I was little, he uprooted his family, and we went off to California. So from Waco to California, that's about the same as from the promised land to Moab. I'm sorry, and so that is where that happens. So Elimelech takes his family and just goes where there's some food and he can provide for them. And while they're there, his sons take wives. We're supposed to do that. And then they die. Elimelech dies and his sons die. And you have Naomi left there with 2 daughters-in-law, and one of them, Orpah. There's a name. Any of you got any daughters or any granddaughters or anyone coming up that are going to need a name? Orpah. Name them that one. Good biblical name. She goes back to her father, back to her family, where she can maybe find a new husband or be taken care of by her family. But Ruth stays with Naomi. They get back to Bethlehem. And they're struggling. They're kind of just making it day by day. They're 2 women alone, no one to help care for them. She's off in the fields gleaning what grain she can find. We talk about how that was God's welfare system. God told the people, when you're harvesting, leave a little bit on the edges. And if you drop something, leave it on the ground. That way the poor can at least come and get your scraps and have some food. So that's what Ruth is out doing, and she happens to be in the field of a man named Boaz. And Boaz takes notice of her, and he actually kind of blesses her, kind of helps her out a little bit, tells his men as they're harvesting to actually just kind of drop some for her. Not accidentally, just drop some handfuls for her to pick up. And he cares for her. And then whenever Naomi hears that Ruth has met Boaz, and Boaz seems to have taken a liking to her, Naomi is encouraged, and hope is beginning to be rekindled, because where everything looked hopeless before, now, hey, Boaz is a distant relative. And under the law of Israel, a relative can redeem your land, your family, as what was called levirate marriage in that day. What would happen is, if you have a widow with no heirs, a relative would marry the widow and then take the land. The land would be back into the family and perpetuate into the family line. And any heirs that were born of that widow would actually bear the deceased husband's name and carry on his line in his side of the family. And so Naomi's kind of encouraged. Ooh, Boaz is a relative. He could redeem us. And so Ruth goes, and they have this weird little ceremony, right? This is the way she goes and uncovers his feet and lays down. That's kind of a weird way to ask someone out, but that's how they did it back then. And so they have the little exchange where she says, please redeem me, and Boaz says, I will. Except there's someone else who kind of has priority, and I got to check with him first. But if he will not, I will. And so that's where the story picks up. Remember, Naomi told Ruth to take heart because he will see it done this day. Boaz has decided he wants Ruth, and he's going to go get it done. And so that's where we pick up in Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz went up to the gate, and he sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. And so Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came aside and sat down. And then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." And so they sat. And so Boaz sees the guy coming by. He goes to the gate of the city. That'd be like the town square. It's kind of where the men gather to do business. It's where you got business to do. It's where you're going to trade. It's where you're going to sell. It's kind of where folks would gather to take care of the business of the town. They didn't really have a city hall. They just went to the place where business happened, and the men of the town would sit down and take care of business. And you had the elders of the town. These are the leaders of the town, the guys who had been around a while. They were a little older. They had more experience. They're considered more wise to handle the affairs of things. And one of the functions they would serve is to witness contracts and to be a witness to business taking place. So if you sold your land to somebody and no one was around to see it, well, then whenever they say, "Yeah, I bought that from him," well, who's there to believe you? Well, this way you have the elders of the town making note. This would be like, filing your deed with the county clerk or something. The elders of the town witnessed it. And Boaz wants to get this done right and proper. I mean, you realize this is a time during the book of Judges. We talked before about the timeline of when Ruth takes place. It's during the book of Judges, which says that in the land of Israel, everyone was doing what seemed right in their own eyes. So really, with kind of the spirit of the time, Boaz could have just said, "Hey, I like Ruth. All right, I'm going to go marry her." But he's a godly man. He wants to do things properly the way it's supposed to be done as the law of the Lord outlines. And someone else actually has a closer claim to redeem than Boaz himself. So he wants to make sure it is all done on the up and up. Verse 3. And then he said to this close relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you." And the man said, "I will redeem it." And so you have Boaz saying, "Hey, look, our countryman, our kinsman, our relative, Elimelech, his land needs to be redeemed. It needs to be brought back into the family. I can't do it, though. You're in line. So if you're going to do it, you need to do it. But if you can't, let me know and I'll do it." And the guy said, "Sure, yeah, I'll buy Elimelech's land." Sounds good, right? Right? There's no family member to stand in as redeemer. Right? Then they kind of his name, Elimelech's name, kind of just vanishes. Right? It just kind of fades away with memory. His land just kind of goes off to whoever. But to keep it in the family, a relative needs to step in and redeem it. And this guy agrees. Yeah, I'll buy Elimelech's land. Apparently real estate is a good investment back then, just like it is today. Because he's saying, yeah, I'll buy Elimelech's land. I'll keep that in the family. And the Boaz goes, okay, well, this is not quite just the land. Because Boaz says, "On the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance." And so there is, she kind of represents her husband. I think it was Mahlon was Ruth's husband, right? The heir of Elimelech. He would have had claim on the land. Now she's the widow of the one who would have been the heir. And so if someone's going to buy the land, they got to take care of the widow. This is an interesting thing because God very, very specifically outlines in his law that you're supposed to take care of widows and orphans. Widows and orphans. Right? In James, whenever he says, hey, you want to know what real religion is? Take care of widows and orphans. And you read through the law of God, and it makes sure that the most destitute and helpless and defenseless among the people are cared for. And this is one of those ways that it would be cared for. That you can't just go, hey, yeah, I'll take that land, and then cast the widow off on the street. It's a package deal. You have to take her too. Well, now this guy kind of thinks through that, and he's not quite keen on that part of it. Verse 6. And the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself. I cannot redeem it. Now, it's not entirely clear exactly what his reasoning is here. We're not told specifically. What does it mean that it would ruin his inheritance? Maybe he has some money, but he's not wealthy. And so taking on the added cost of caring for 2 widows and any children that might result, well, now he has to care for them too, but they don't get to become his children. They would be considered Elimelech's heirs. And so any children he might have by Ruth wouldn't be his heirs. So they would basically just be a drain on his estate, and he wouldn't be getting the benefit of that. Now, this may be a greedy thing, maybe. Maybe he's saying, oh, I don't want to waste my money on that. Or it could just simply be that he didn't have the money to do it. And that it would basically just wipe out his inheritance for his kids. And so he just says, you know what, I don't have the money to do that. But that is okay because Boaz is more than happy to step in and be that redeemer. And then we get this weird little ceremony. Verse 7. Now this was the custom in those times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. You just shake hands? Yeah, hand you their shoe. Do you even want their shoe? That seems kind of like, oh, okay, no, I trust you. Your word is good. I don't need your sandal. That's kind of gross, right? But this was a ceremony, and I read somewhere where they think it like dates back to like you own the land, how is it that we say it nowadays? Possession is 9/10 of the law, right? That you're physically on the land means it's yours. A lot of times in some other cultures around in that time, kind of a real estate exchange ceremony involved where the person who was selling would step off the property or would lift his foot off the property, and then he would bend down and take the person who's buying it and set their foot on the property, showing this is no longer mine, it is now yours. So maybe this is something similar to that. I mean, they didn't, just draw up deeds and sign things and go, file them with the county or something. They had other ways of doing this, and this is just one of them. But they have some weird little customs, and we've looked at a few of them through this. Right, like the custom of whenever Ruth came to Boaz, uncovered his feet and laid down. That's just a weird custom to us. We look at that and think, well, that's just bizarre. And at that time we looked at that, we also talked about how in Genesis, whenever they would make a pledge, you'd put your hand under the person's thigh. That just seems kind of strange. Can't we just shake? Right? But they have these different customs, and even though it seems just strange and weird to us, it was them honoring their integrity and honoring the Lord. And I think there's an interesting little lesson we can learn there. Because one of the things that we can be tempted to do is fall into a way of thinking where if it doesn't look like us, if it doesn't happen the way we do it, then it's not being done right. Has anyone traveled outside the country and been to maybe some churches outside? I went to Peru years ago. And standing in a church, listening to a sermon and music, I can't understand anything they're saying, playing on instruments that I've never even seen before, and just the way they did their service, the flow of everything was just so completely foreign to any church service I'd ever been in before. but they were there praising the Lord. They were serving God. And so there are ways that may seem strange to us that other people have, but they're in keeping with their integrity, honoring God in their way. And so if it's not outright sin, and it's just a matter of style or custom, and it's people praising the Lord and loving the Lord in their own way, then God bless them. Celebrate with them. May not want to take their sandal if they, take off their shoes. Just let them keep that. But, celebrate with them. We can all worship and honor God in the same way, but with different traditions and customs and styles. I've been in about every different style of church you could imagine. Early on, I was in Assembly of God, where if you want to answer an altar call, it's like walking through an obstacle course because everybody's dancing. You got people swinging around. You got bodies laid out on the floor you got to step over, right? A lot of us would see that and go, oh, hold on. That's just kind of weird. What are y'all doing? I've been in churches where we didn't have any instrument at all, where we didn't have gifted people who could sing to lead us. It just, hey, there was a guy who was willing to get up. Praise the Lord for his willingness, because that's about all he had was willingness. I've been in churches that have the full band rocking. I've had where we don't have screens or projections. I've been, you name it. I've been in ones where the service was done just in different weird and strange ways. I've been in the high traditional ones where the guy's wearing the robe with the stole and the guys walk down the altar or walk down the aisle with little candle things and light the candles on the altar and go through a whole ceremony. I've been in cowboy churches, right? And everything in between. It doesn't matter how someone is worshiping the Lord if they are worshiping the Lord. Amen? Verse 8. Therefore, the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal, and Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witness this day. Making sure it's all done on the up and up. Verse 11. And all the people who are at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. It's quite a blessing, right? We just say, hey, good luck, right? A little bit more impassioned people back then. A little bit more direct about well-wishing. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him. And then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. It's really interesting, the blessings, the magnitude of blessing that is given, considering, as we're about to see, the direction this family line takes. That they would give these, well, it kind of seems like overly flourishing, overly flowery blessings and wishings upon them. Almost prophetic because of what happens. And they called his name Obed, and he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Verse 18. Now this is a genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz, and Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. And we know that guy, David, as in King David. Man after God's own heart, and who eventually is a descendant of David, Jesus himself. And we see that where once hopelessness and bitterness ruled in the heart of Naomi, hope has now not only been restored, but has been realized. And God has delivered. But it's not just hope restored to Ruth and Naomi, right? Not just for them, but to us. Because of whom will come from this union. Boaz and Ruth are the great-grandparents of King David, from whom we will get Jesus. So hope is restored, which means hope is restored to all mankind. A couple of observations I want to make as we close out. They remain faithful. These are faithful people in an unfaithful time. The period of time of Judges was a dark time in the days of Israel. It was a constant turning away from God, and only whenever it was desperate enough would they cry out for his help. And that was usually just little regional pockets of deliverance, never the whole nation at once. It was a time, as I said, is described as when everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so here, in the midst of a nation in turmoil, ruled by pride, we have a few faithful. We're always talking the faithful remnant. You know, on Sunday nights, Dr. Krause, we're always talking about, as we're going through Isaiah, there's always going to be this faithful remnant. So as much as Israel as a whole may have been in rebellion against God off and on, throughout it all, there were those who were faithful. And here we see Ruth and Boaz. And they're just trying to get by. There's just some folks trying to get by. They're not thinking of their lives in a grander scale of something. They're just trying to make it day by day, but they're staying faithful to God. And one thing that I noticed going on here, as we've talked about going from the hopelessness to hope being restored, a common criticism that I hear people bring up is about pain or suffering in the world that we experience in life. But what we see in Scripture is that there could be down the road a greater good that God can bring about because of it. And we all know this to be true short term, right? If you need a diet, is that fun? No. If you've ever been injured or had to go through some kind of rehab where you had to physically relearn how to walk or how to do something, that is not pleasant, but the end result is. And we all know testimonies of people who, if it wasn't for that person 2 generations ago, well, then it wouldn't have happened in my time. We can tell those stories. I think a famous one is Billy Graham, like his Sunday school teacher. You go back another generation and there was some tragedy that put that person in that place to be able to be the Sunday school teacher of Billy Graham and be that influence in his life. I know the story of James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family, who has just done massive amounts of work around the world on marriages and families and helping people to honor God through that. His dad was a very successful traveling evangelist who had to come home, who had to give up his successful ministry on the road to come home to help raise his unruly child, who would go on to become Dr. James Dobson. And what we see going on here is you have a tragedy. You have a famine in the land. You have Elimelech dying, his sons dying, Naomi and Ruth all alone. Why would God allow that? Because in that situation, she met Boaz. And through Ruth and Boaz, we get David. And from David, we get Christ. And so, yes, there was tragedy along the road, but the destination was one of hope and joy and celebration. Second, I love the story because it focuses on the little guys. Who's Ruth and Boaz? They're nobodies. Right? Most of the Bible, we're talking about kings and prophets. Right? Moses standing face to face with Pharaoh saying, "Let my people go." Right? We focus on the big stuff. Well, this is a story about some little nobodies off in a village in Judah. Bethlehem, where's that? Hadn't heard of it before. Right? At that time, who cared? Just some little backwater village, some little people nobody knew about. But they're faithful nobodies. And God is faithful to them. And we might get caught up in the big scale things, right? There's been some rather large scale events going on lately that kind of overshadow everything else in the news, right? Do you realize there's more going on in the world than a presidential thing? You wouldn't know it if you're just watching the news. There's nothing else going on. It's all people are thinking about, all they're focusing on, all they're talking about. Well, here in this story, God goes, okay, forget the big stuff. Let's zero in on some local, personal stuff that's going on. God doesn't just care about the big. He cares about the small. Each and every one of us. Who, I know we have all had those moments where we felt like echoing the words of David, right? Who am I that you would know my name? Why would you care about me? But the book of Ruth shows us that he indeed does. And so as we are gearing up for Thanksgiving, we do need to count our blessings, name them one by one. We also need to remember, forget about the big stuff. Put aside the big stuff. The news, our social media, right? Bless you if you're trying to navigate those waters. But let's just put aside all of that this week as we focus on the little things. Not the big things. As we see God cares about the little things too, and so should we. The politics and news, or should we focus on our family, right? On our friends, on what's going on in our lives and the things we have to be thankful for, or the things we have to be hopeful for, as we see that even though there may be the appearance of hopelessness, and we might think, well, who am I that God would care about me? As we see, he cares about nobodies. And there can be hope at the end of that road. There was hope for them, there can be hope for us.
Every time I feel the walls closing, cover me and breathe life in me again. Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear. You've ransomed me with blood.